So now we have Lin Malson, and her paper title is Bloodlines. Now Dr. Lin Malson...
Sorry, someone else was up.
She's a sculptor whose practice is driven by the entangled relationships between humans and non-human animals. In particular, she's interested in agricultural animals and biotech industries. Her sculptural research has been featured in books such as The Art of the Animal, which was published by Lantern Press in 2015, and in Carol J. Adams' Neither Man Nor Beast, Bloomsbury 2018, and also in Animalities, again by Bloomsbury Press 2018. Lynn's exhibited widely in Australia where she lives now, and her artwork has been included in the Sexual Politics of Meat exhibition at the Animal Museum, Los Angeles in 2017 with Angela's work. She's currently the Vice Chair of the Australasian Animal Studies Association and Research Assistant and Committee Member for the Human Rights and Animal Ethics Research Network. So Lynn has a website, as does Angela. It's basically their names. So if you want to Google them, it's www.linmalson.com in this case. And so hand over now to Lynn. Kia ora. Welcome.
Kia ora, bora da, hello and good morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank wholeheartedly the conference organisers for putting art on the conference panel, and all the other attendees who are making this conference really special. Sorry, I can't see you, there's just lights in my eyes. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I speak and pay my deepest respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, the rightful, traditional and original owners and custodians of the country on which I live and work. I'd also like to take a moment just quickly to welcome you all to join us at the Australasian Animal Studies Association AGM at 1 o'clock. Promo over. My talk today, let me get myself all, can't see what I'm doing there. All right. My talk today focuses on 4 of my ongoing art projects: the museums, Speaking Meat, Bloodlines and Octo Skins. Maybe I'll use this. I developed the project, the Museum of Forgotten Objects and the Museum of Carnism, a few years ago as a way of managing the affect of objects of oppression that I continually encounter in my daily life and in my research. It was a way to imagine alternative possibilities and a way of unthinking or disrupting these objects. These museums are hypothetical exhibition spaces. They exist in a future, and there are no particular features of this future, with the exception that I imagine that we no longer use animal bodies for food, clothing, science, or entertainment. They could exist in a utopian future or a dystopian future in which all other animal species are now extinct and historical records are minimal. The Museum of Forgotten Objects is situated in the future where we no longer remember what these everyday implements were used for, and they've lost their original meaning. The objects have become estranged and odd. Whereas the Museum of Carnism is a museum that remembers our past and gathers the objects together to witness a history of exploitation and violence towards other species. The wide variety of household and agricultural objects and equipment that I collect and categorised can be placed in either museum, and this, of course, alters the readings of the objects. The project works with the idea of détournement, as Patrice mentioned yesterday. Détournement was popularised as an artistic strategy by the Situationalists International. It was used to overturn the existing objects of the capitalist system against itself by overturning or derailing the original meaning of the object. The aim is for subversive or marginalised, and in my case liberationist, ideas to be spread contagiously by reappropriating the artefacts of dominant culture. The strategy involves the loss of importance or meaning of the original détourned element, perhaps to go as far as completely losing its original sense. And another aspect is to create new meaning for the objects through juxtaposition with other objects or new contexts. For example, placing these examples of very normal, everyday farm equipment in the Museum of Carnism as tools of domination over other species' reproduction. In the Museum of Forgotten Objects, I imagine that these strange, small ceramic objects have been found en masse. I play hypothetical games with these objects, imagining peoples of the future trying to establish what they were used for. Was there some symbiotic relationship between these creatures and humans? Did humans provide resting places for their eggs? Or were these kinfolk that we actually tried to feed? Were these their water bowls? The Museum of Carlinism displays the objects with reference to their histories of horror and exploitation. In these 19th century Victorian silverware objects, you can identify evidence of multi-leveled exploitation and cruelty. The egg holder is a receptacle to hold the egg. Next to the egg cup, the chick, as if hatched from the very egg you are eating. And both sit upon the bones of the meat chicken. And I imagine the text reading something like this. The wishbone egg cup references folk practices of breaking bones. After sitting round in groups devouring the carcasses of birds, the bird's clavicle is removed from the body, and two people, taking an end each, will pull on the bone till they break. This practice of physically tearing apart the body of an animal was widely practiced in Western culture from the 17th century. Apparently, the person who ended up with the largest remaining piece of bone was allowed to make a wish, and this barbaric practice was completely normalized and was apparently conducted with some frivolity. The unbroken wishbone was a symbol of good luck, but not, obviously, for the chicken, and best wishes. And these objects were gifted as presents, particularly at Easter, and you can see a range of the objects that have been, when this wishbone symbol is used. I collect examples of agricultural equipment as well as domestic objects, and many items already appear as medieval torture devices. But these are absolutely mundane pieces of farming equipment, which I hope one day we will view with the same horror. I know all you guys already do. This is not a project for you. Here is my collection of weaning devices, nose guards and calf collars made on the farm or by blacksmiths initially, now sold as curios or home decorations. And again, I have another sample here of a nose ring and a nose guard, and the nose guards are clearly homemade. A contemporary, more fun, brightly coloured example of weaning devices used on young calves left with their mothers, but also now a new marketing opportunity has appeared. They're used to prevent separated calves attempting to cross-suckle. Cross-suckle is suckling on any part of another penmate's body, or intersuckle, which is attempting to suckle on the non-lactating udder of their penmate. And this suckling on intersuckling especially causes abscesses, mastitis and teat deformities in freshly developing dairy cattle. So cross and intersucklers are ultimately killed at the end of each season rather than raised on as dairy cattle. In situating various objects in these hypothetical museums, I ask that we rethink or even unthink these objects to reveal the ways in which the practices of violence against animals has been normalised and how objects in everyday use are evidence of species domination. Since 2011, my sculptural practice has been primarily concerned with animals that are farmed for human consumption. As we start to look at my sculptures, I'd like to mention a small distinction between representation, as in mimicking the outward appearance of something, and representation. It is not my aim to make something look like something, but rather to represent it, maybe by focusing on one element of the animal or mammalian body, such as in this example, the breast, teat, nipple, udder work, in a work that references the dairy industry, and I do so to try and bring the mammalian body into presence. I have developed material vocabularies that I use and build into my works. I work primarily in wax to create flesh-like objects and latex to create skins and membranes. I use dismemberment as a way of making visible, a little like Angela, and visceral the violence that we commit towards our fellow creatures. and reassembling, representation, and remembering as a way to show the things we share in death and life with our fellow creatures. The prefix re is very important to me. It means again and again and again. It references the seemingly never-ending violence against animals, and it also means going back. And my working methodology is to constantly use and reuse previous sculptures and their meanings in my work. And the Speaking Meat project is an example of this. In the first iteration of this project, 3 large fleshy lumps were created from the buttock, thigh, and back of my wax sculpture of a mammalian body. I cut into the body with large knives and cleavers in a process that felt like butchery, and I reassembled these cuts of wax into fleshy lumps. And like Angela, I use wax because it is so extremely fragile, and it's always possibly, for me, on the brink of collapse, and the fragility requires ongoing care. Embedded within each of these works, and here's a photo of me handing one out, was a Bluetooth speaker which allowed these small objects to be handed out while they were still speaking and uttering sounds. Now, the Speaking Meat project utilised doses of dark and perhaps hysterical humour and acts of strategic anthropomorphism in a futile attempt to give voice to meat. Meat is an object and not a subject. Individuality and animality is removed from sight, language, and consciousness. And importantly, the Speaking Meat project did not aim to speak for or provide a voice for animals, but rather articulate the way in which language encircles, enframes, and encompasses the animal subject and their corpses. And it was a performance that was both ludicrous and poignant. As I passed these out to the audience, and they passed them around, there were many responses. Some people didn't initially want to handle them, some were surprised by how light they were, some sniffed them, others held them to their ears to listen. And even when people knew that they were only wax objects, they still had visceral responses to them and the way that they vibrated with the sound in their hands. I'm just going to do a little bit of the script. Apologies in advance for any explicit language, and I'm not a performer. Meat. The work starts with the veal calf. He's only 5 days old, with no real idea about life. The veal steak is moving into language, from subjecthood, me, to objecthood, meat. Another flesh lump that will appear, and these don't actually correspond all the time to the lumps, is Daisy, the milker, a retired dairy cow. She's 4 years old, and she's been slaughtered because she is no longer productive. And there's also the heavy breather, an argumentative voice of the rotting steak, a cut of meat taken from a young steer in his prime. He's the voice of the master, and he's aligned with the master narrative of carnism, and he's all puffed up. He's expensive, but he's also going off. Steak constantly tries to stop the conversation between veal and Daisy, interjecting with shh, shh, and insults throughout the performance. What are you? Says the young veal. Well, only young, he's accepting of his status as an object, not a subject, and uses what rather than who. Daisy is unsure of who she is, disorientated, perhaps even hysterical. Daisy, I'm so crazy, she replies. Are you meat? No, 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 no. No, I'm bitch. I'm motherfucker. I'm A222 slag, milker. Come on, move it, you fucking downer. Daisy, in her refusal to accept her status as meat, repeats the names and commands she's experienced in her life as a dairy cow. I'm A222. I was milker, she says, somewhat unsure and surprised in trying to seek to remember that identity. Milker? Asked Veal. Milker. I made milk. Shut up, dog meat. Veal. I've never heard of meat making milk. I'm not meat. Be quiet, shank. Trying to rest. I need to rest to be my best. I'm in my prime. I'm prime steak. In the language of meat, prime steak being top of the cuts, co-opts his status. He looks down on all the other meats. Dog meat. I leave this very brief overview of this work, which is going through a number of different iterations at the moment with some creative writers, with the words of the author Mandy Wong, writing about this work. Quote, "This artwork isn't just disturbing and absurd, it's funny, haha. Speaking meat is nonsense, and that's what makes speaking meat risky and incisive, and true. I hear, especially in Daisy's frightened frenzy, that the anonymous cow whose living body became the corpse that became the meat, that became the morsel on the end of my fork, suffered, and suffered in a way that even I can understand." So from these smaller projects, and like Angela, I work on projects continuously. They don't seem to stop. I'd like them to stop, but the reason that generates them hasn't stopped. I'm going to talk about Bloodlines, which is a project that draws together many research tangents to create a large diagram or messy mud map of the expanded and tangled arms of the agricultural industry. When I started investigating the production of biofabricated leathers, I'd hoped for a very playful research break from my previous work on the lives and deaths of dairy cows. Latex had allowed me to develop a vocabulary of skin and the effects from soft, translucent, fragile membranes through to thickened, dried, aged vellum. This material focus on skin led me to the topic of biofabrication. Biofabrication is the production of living and non-living biological products from materials such as cells, molecules, and other biomaterials. It's the umbrella term for the technology that produces animal-free foods such as in vitro meats and fur products. Biofabricated leather has been heralded as the replacement for environmentally damaging tanning processes required by leather and vastly reducing the numbers of animals slaughtered for their leather. For manufacturers, the ability to produce leather material in a continuous roll is cost-effective. The animal body is wasteful. It has low cutting efficiencies because of the awkward shape of the body, as well as any bruising or scars or unwanted and unrecognizable anatomical elements such as teats. And you see here a very clear diagram. Almost immediately into the research, I was struck by the use of diagrams to represent this new process to the investor and the consumer. And here's an early diagram by one of the innovators, Modern Meadow. Sorry, making sure my slides are in the right place. A company that started their experimentation with in vitro meat. As you can see, an animal, here a cow looking rather happy, is biopsied for cells. For in vitro meat, the cells are collected from the muscle tissue, and for biofabricated leathers, the cells are harvested from collagen-producing epithelial cells. These cells are then grown in a culture, which is grown in laboratory conditions on scaffolds or in molds, and the material is then finished and produced in the end product, in this case, leather. And here's the same process showing it's quite a similar process to produce in vitro meat. New Harvest produced this rather bright and cheerful diagram of their in vitro meat process. It's very mustard and ketchup, colours that not only relate to the sauces that accompany burgers, but also to McDonald's colour scheme and graphic info style. In all these diagrams, the donor animals are depicted as freestanding source objects, an object from which cells are produced, one object amongst many in the workflow to create meat. In this particular image, the muscle cells sourced from the dot on the cow, the sore spot, I call it, bounce like balls off trampolines into the processing vat to become a meat patty. It's fun. It's easy, they seem to say, but the reality is somewhat different. While diagrams elucidate and make clear, they also obscure, and in some cases incorporate a logic of concealment. The cow represents a cow, but which cow? And what are the conditions in which they live? And how are these samples procured? And also what you don't see in these diagrams is the other animals whose bodies are essential to the production of in vitro meats. This diagram shows what's missing. It's the inclusion of the key ingredient in the growth medium for mammalian cells. It's fetal bovine serum. The source of fetal bovine serum is the blood from the bodies of fetal calves killed in the slaughterhouse. And currently it takes 50 litres of fetal bovine serum to culture a single burger, which equates to 150 fetal calves. Imagine if those numbers were included in this diagram. My response to these diagrams is a work in progress, and I haven't had a chance to exhibit it yet because it takes about 20 metres of space. And it's called Bloodlines, and the drawing indicates how my extant sculptures and new sculptures might come together, linked by fluids such as blood and milk, to create a very, very messy and not very clean diagram of animal bodies entangled in the biotechnology industries, to be experienced viscerally through sculptural renderings of fluids, fleshes and skin. At the centre of the work is the mammalian mother, included through the work Boob Scape. Boob Scape focused on shared mammalian homologies to respond to the lives and deaths of the dairy cows and the impact of the industry. Bringing together breasts, udders, nipples, teats, I blurred the boundaries of the mammalian bodies, installing them in growth-like clusters. The massive lactating forms refer to the massification of industrialised milk production, the details of which will be familiar to most of you in the audience, especially those of you who attended the framing farming session yesterday. The dairy industry is a key source of cattle being slaughtered pregnant, and without pregnant cows going to slaughter, there is no fetal bovine serum. Dairy cows are sent to slaughter pregnant due to lameness, mastitis, decreased productivity and old age. They're sent to slaughter for economic reasons, such as low milk prices, and farm management reasons. For example, they lactate at different times. I should try and use this. It is common for intensive farms to inseminate an entire herd of dairy cattle and then send them to slaughter when convenient. Some cows are inseminated simply to make them more manageable on the farm through the reduction of their estrous behaviours, which create, quote, restless, licking, sniffing, mounting, queer and frisky cows. The link between mastitis and the death of pregnant cows was one of the critical research zones for Boob Scape, and it continues to infect the newer works in my in vitro fabrics. Mastitis is an infection of the mammary gland. The mastitis pathogen, and there are around 200 types, enters through the epithelial cell. When I first inverted my Boob Scape cast, I was struck by the resemblance of the inverted breast to these microscopic images of infected cells, the breast resembling the cells being pushed together and the nipple and teat representing or resembling the cell nucleus. In front of Boob Scape, I plan to hang components of my work Slink. Slink is a work which started in 2011, responding to the treatment of fetal animals in slaughterhouse. Slink skin is uterine skin, fetal skin used in high-end leather products, for high-end leather products and for vellums. Slinks were born prematurely or taken from their mother's slaughtered bodies, where other byproducts and co-products, such as fetal blood, because that is not a byproduct, are collected. Fetal blood must be collected from the still living body of a fetal animal, and despite ongoing challenges and the recent protection of fetal animals in scientific experiments, the fetal animals in slaughterhouses are afforded no such protections. The collection process remains barbaric. The fetal animal is removed from the pregnant mother immediately after she is slaughtered and sent to the slink room, and here they are prevented from taking their first breath, for economic reasons, by either keeping their heads inside the amniotic sac or placing the plastic bag over their head or clamping their throat. A syringe drains the heart of blood, and it's essential for maximum collection that the heart remains beating through this process. The European Serum Products Association, a major distributor of FBS, fetal bovine serum, assures the consumer that the slaughter of pregnant cows is unplanned and the percentage of pregnant cows going to slaughter is very low and decreasing year by year as farming techniques constantly improve. However, the reduction of pregnant cows going to slaughter is at odds with the increasing industry demands for co-products. It is estimated, based on industry figures, that approximately 800,000 litres of FPS are produced annually, which equates to the collection from approximately 2 million fetuses globally. Biotechnology industries are facing increasing challenges getting access to FBS. The price is high and the supply is accidental. The quality of global fetal bovine serum is incredibly variable. And the Meat and Livestock Association reports that, the Meat and Livestock Association of Australia reports that the difficulty of the supply in fetal co-products could be resolved by giving a higher price for pregnant cattle. They say, if growers knew they could attain a better price for pregnant animals, they would most certainly supply them. Additionally, industry reports comment upon the blood and tissue wastage where slink processing is not in place in slaughterhouses. The growing market for fetal byproducts and co-products is considered a commercial opportunity for Australia. Again, the Meat and Livestock Association reports have investigated the potential commercial and economic value of fetal blood, amniotic fluid, placental material, and other bioactives co-products, other bioactive co-products for markets such as Chinese medicine, medical research, stem cell culturing, and cosmeceuticals. While this art project was in development, the in vitro industry, and in fact many other areas of cellular technology industry, were completely reliant on fetal bovine serum as a universal growth medium for mammalian cells. Although steps were and are being taken to reduce the reliance on this medium due to consumer concern, and mostly due to cost, it will be potentially the cost and shortage of supply of FBS and not regulatory pressures that will force the industry to develop alternatives. Bloodlines will also feature hypothetical examples of biofabrics, but unlike biofabrics, these will reference the animal body. And in fact, there are already references in both Boob Scape and Slink to the scars and pocks and sores and alterations of the farmed animal body, and this process will continue. This is a mould I developed to incorporate elements of cell imaging, the misshapen cell lines, the deterioration of cells affected with mastitis, which is the leading cause of culling pregnant cattle. And some samples are influenced by the muscle cells biopsied for in vitro meat, the multiple holes, the sore spots created by the biopsy process required to harvest cells for in vitro processing. While animals do not need to be killed to harvest cells, the numbers and living conditions of the donor animals is rarely discussed. And while I support efforts to significantly reduce the number of animals suffering for research and food, in Bloodlines I aim to keep focus on the bodies of donor animals and the reliance on FBS and its source, the bodies of pregnant cows and their fetuses, to grow mammalian cells. Biofabrication, such as in vitro meat, continue to rely on using the animal body instead of directing attention towards plant-based possibilities. In vitro meat, or cell-based meat in particular, continues to work within the anthropocentric ideology that considers other animals' bodies as resources and products. It is an approach that does not question the necessity to eat meat, but directs enormous resources towards facilitating this need. This is a fast-moving industry, and in May of this year, Meatable, a Dutch clean meat company, announced that it had done away... Oh, I've lost my timer, sorry. No. It had done away with FBS by replacing mammalian muscle cells with pluripotent stem cells, which can grow into muscle or fat without fetal bovine serum. I hold my breath to see whether this offers any improvement. Muscle cells are taken from the bodies of living animals. Pluripotent cells are taken from the umbilical cords of animals. This way, we don't harm any animals at all. It's a material that otherwise would get thrown away, they say. Thrown away from where, I ask? Slaughterhouses, I guess. Because at this point, this is the only way in which these products can be readily collected en masse and stored for extraction. Before I move on very quickly to look at the last project, I just want to say on a more positive note, there are many companies out there making biofabricated leathers without animal bodies now. I started with some slides by Modern Meadow, who used animal cells and fetal bovine serum initially, but as they experienced incredible difficulties in the supply chain sourcing the materials, they've moved to creating alternative fabrics out of things like collagen-producing yeast, this product Zoa. We've got other people working with fungus, fungal roots, and my favorite, because it totally avoids the high-tech necessity to grow cells in laboratory conditions by cleverly just using existing plant material, is the pineapple fabric. Oh, I was going to show you a sample. I've left it in the hotel room. Sorry. And lastly, in the last few minutes, I just want to look very briefly at my current work in progress for a group show called Ōtautahi. And I think there's a presentation on after this. About that project. For this project, I spent a lot of time reading about the amazing lives of octopuses. And once again, my attempt to find a positive place to situate my work was derailed by the two key themes that preoccupy my work: animal consumption and motherhood, or I should say rather, the exploitation of reproduction, which is deeply bound into any form of animal agriculture. Octopus motherhood is really fascinating. After mating, the octopus carries her eggs inside for months, and within hours of being fertilized, the eggs are colonized by her bacteria. And it's known that these eggs that the eggs that survive have the greatest diversity of bacteria, something which is found in the octopus mucus. And when the conditions are right, she expels her eggs and gathers them into group and stitches them into braids which are glued to a surface, a den, a glass bottle, whatever. She might eat for the next few days, but after that she abstains from any food, protecting, grooming and fanning the eggs. We don't know if octopuses provide any chemical signals to their young, but we do know there's a lot going on with those suckers, each one having about 10,000 sensory neurons able to detect textures, shapes and chemicals. The mother will not leave her eggs, and often her last act is to blow the hatchlings into the sea. The period of care can last a long time. In fact, the longest documented to date is over 4.5 years, during which time the effect on the body are clear to see. And this is one of the longest brooding octopuses. The skin loses colour and definition. And of course, with my focus on skins, I was intrigued by this thin and scarred skin texture. The increasing global appetite for octopus is generating research into farming them intensively, of course. Intensive aquaculture is one of the fastest growing food industries, with over 550 aquatic animal species currently being raised in captivity. Octopus initially appear to be solid contenders for factory farming. They produce eggs in great numbers, they grow fast, they have small lifespans. One aquaculture study noted that the Octopus vulgaris meets, quote, many of the requirements to be considered as a candidate for industrial culture, easy adaptation to captivity conditions, high growth rate, acceptance of low-value natural foods, high reproductive rate, and a very high market price. Of course, octopus are eaten around the world, and researching them involved watching some pretty horrific footage of live octopus being decapitated and their still functioning arms cut limb from limb. Footage of octopus being dug out of rocks and killed with sharp wires, and traditional ways of drying them in the sun. It was this image, and then the nightmare-producing images of the still-moving arms of the octopus being cut apart from the body, that led to my focus on the arms of the octopus for the work. Now we're on to my work. And these are just work-in-progress shots. There are a few welfare considerations for fish, and practically none for invertebrates, who are considered to be lower on the evolutionary scale. But octopus are atypical. Not that I concur with intelligence as a method of measurement for welfare concerns, or any concerns. Not only are octopus intelligent, they're carnivorous, and farming them requires at least 3 kilograms of animal-based foods to produce 1 kilogram of octopus, putting further pressure on sea life. Octopuses are also antisocial cannibals and are lauded for their ability to escape. They have no acquired immunity, which means that they cannot be vaccinated against common infection, which is a significant problem in any crowded agricultural environment. Added to this, the issue that reproduction is usually fatal for both the male, who often dies after mating, and the female, who dies in brooding. Currently, to get eggs, wild octopus are caught and bred, and the eggs are taken from the female before she broods. And some of them have been successfully hatched but not yet reared on. However, experiments to date have not managed to get females to lay a second batch of eggs, and some of the research that's going into this in terms of removing the optic nerves of females to get them to reproduce consistently is rather horrific. Australia is part of the research race to farm octopus. In WA, octopus juveniles, which are underweight bycatchers from the lobster farming industry and the like, are on-grown in tanks or sea cages, and this process is called ranching. Research into farming tanks that can grow octopus without contact with each other actually found that if octopus are grown together at the same time, at the same age, they're actually not aggressive, and they don't show any signs of cannibalism. And this discovery is paving the way for high-density farming once they learn how to raise embryonic paralarva to the stage of juvenile octopus. These are photos of the works in progress I'm currently working on. It's intended that they will hang from a ceiling in a number of sizes, accompanied by egg clusters. And my aim is, like Boob Scapes, to cluster these large numbers of limbs to reference the number of animals impacted by consumption. And in collaboration with my partner Bruce Mowson, he's Mowson, I'm Mowson, the works will light gently from the inside, revealing the skin textures. Octopus have this amazing ability to control the texture of their skin through their papillae, and I've included a number of my biofabric samples from Bloodlines into this work to reference not only this biological function that the octopus have, but also the increasing intervention of biotechnologies on their lives. While my work mostly dwells amongst violence and death, there are some moments of amusement, such as when I removed this cast, maybe I've got a funny sense of humour, when I removed this cast from my mould, I was struck by the mini boob scapes that were formed on the inverse of the cast, with each sucker becoming a miniature breast and nipple. And this is most definitely a feature that will reappear in my artwork in the future as I continue to reuse, represent, and remember animal lives. Diolch yn fawr, thank you for your time. And just to stay with the theme,